country of Pakistan has had an unusually long and severe monsoon season. A third of the country is underwater. Lakes have appeared hundreds of feet deep where there have never been lakes before. Public radio was interviewing one of the leaders of a political party in that country, and the man said, I think rather eloquently, I am by nature an optimist. I try to see the silver lining that runs through all events. But this, where have you been in your life where you say, but this? Maybe it came with a diagnosis in the doctor's office or a sad letter from your employer. Maybe it came in a failed marriage or a child gone astray. Or maybe it came simply by being completely overwhelmed by everything in life. This? And it's not just us as individuals, is it? When we read the paper or look at the news with all of our stories about gun violence and corruption and fraud and racism and poverty and on, what do we say? You know, there are some people in this country who are beginning to say, democracy doesn't work. But then, the little country of Judea faced a similar situation. The background for today's Old Testament reading from Jeremiah takes place in Judea and in the capital city of Jerusalem. The time period is the 590s and 580s BC. The great superpower of the world was Babylon, and they were on the move. And they attacked Judea with a scorched earth policy. They burned everything in the way. The land was made desolate. At one point in the book of Jeremiah, they describe it. Desolation. Desolation, they say. No human being. No animals. No plant. Nothing. But this. When we reach this place in life, it drives us to look at the foundations of our existence, to look at the structure that holds our lives together. And it asks us some questions about God. Years ago, I had a parishioner who had started to come to church for a while and then completely disappeared. So I went to call on her, and as soon as she opened the door to her house, she burst into tears. She went and sat on the couch, bent over, weeping profusely and saying, God can't forgive me for what I've done. God can't forgive me for what I've done. Over and over again. I tried to talk with her, but all she had to say was, God can't forgive me. As I left, she was still crying, and I never saw her again. But this, she said, can't God act? Does God care? Can God deal with the lives that you and I live? Think of Jesus carrying the beam of the cross toward Calvary. where death awaited him. A kangaroo court, deserted by friends, the enemy of the religious and political establishment, a failure, the mission over, done, desolation, death, despair. That's what he saw. My God, why have you forsaken me? That's it. That's it. Well, that leads us to today's peculiar little story that is the Old Testament reading for today. It's the prophet Jeremiah, and he is under house arrest. He's under house arrest for telling the king that they will not win the war against Babylon. And get this, he said to the king, why don't you just give up? So he ended up in jail. He had a dream in which he saw a relative of his cousin, coming in, offering to sell him land. Now, in Levitical law at that time, if you wanted to raise money by selling land, you had to offer it to your relatives. That's so that the land remained within the clan, remained in the family, didn't get dispersed. So his cousin comes from the hometown and says, Jeremiah, will you buy the land? And much to everyone's surprise and shock, he agrees. Jeremiah, they were saying, do you know what it's like in your hometown? There is no hometown. There's nothing there. The olive trees are dead. The cattle is gone. There's no one to work the land. This is not a time to do this. The economy is collapsed. There is no future. No one is buying or selling anything. And Jeremiah said, I am. And he pays a handsome sum to purchase the property. And he has all the legal work carefully tended to. And then he gives that legal work to his secretary, Baruch. And he says, now put this in the equivalent of a safety deposit box. Put this away in an earthenware jar for another time. Because there will be a day when people buy and sell and plant and harvest. But this? Jeremiah had a word from the Lord. And if we were to read a few dozen verses beyond the end of today's reading, we would hear that word. The word of the Lord came to Jeremiah, and it said, I am the God of all flesh. Is there anything impossible for the Lord? Anything? Jeremiah said, the day is coming. The day is coming when God will deliver. And it happened. The Babylonian Empire collapsed, was taken over by the Persians. A different leader, Cyrus the Great, released all of the exiles that he had taken out of Jerusalem and carried off to Babylon with all of their goods. He said, you can go back home to Judea. Here's all the booty and the goods that you came. I'll have soldiers escort you back to Judea. And furthermore, I'll pay for you to rebuild the city. The day came. And then there's Jesus trudging to Calvary with that crossbeam. And we know that on the third day, by the power of God, he was raised in a glorified body beyond death. Someone was telling me this past week about a conversation with a granddaughter, and they ended up talking about the resurrection. And the granddaughter said, well, no, I don't believe in the resurrection. It's impossible. That's the point. It's impossible, but it happened. God raised Jesus from the dead. Is anything impossible to the Lord? Now, what if we could access it? What if we could have that resurrection power in our life? That hope that Jeremiah had. What if we had access? Well, the truth is, we do. We do. When you walked into the cathedral today, you walked past the baptismal font. That's the point of baptism. In baptism, God acts on us. It's not just a nice thing we do for some kids. Baptism is the major event in a person's life. In baptism, God reaches down from heaven and grabs us and says, "You're mine. I know you. I'll never let you go. I make promises to you. And furthermore, I will join you to the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ." And that means that pattern of movement from death to life will become the pattern in our lives. So we can always recognize when God is at work because it will be a movement from error to truth, from darkness to light, from death to life. Is anything impossible? God? Power. And as we commune today, the risen Lord will be with us, feeding us on his own presence. And that, in effect, is a renewal of this baptismal, "Yes, I am with you," bringing life to light. Years ago, I had a parishioner, actually one of the pillars of the congregation, who was diagnosed with terrible abdominal illness. Surgery was prescribed. She was convinced that she was going to die. Now, in fact, she didn't, but there was absolutely no doubt in her mind that she would not make it out of that. I went to call on her the night before the surgery. I sneaked into the hospital and walked into her darkened room. And there she was, praying. She had a copy of the 23rd Psalm pinned to her pillow. And she said to me, "I am going to show my son how a Christian died." Vision, purpose, love, meaning, even in the face of death. Is anything impossible to the Lord?